Welcome to Fundamentals for Startup, a CoMotion Labs production. My name is Siri V. Monchalau, CoMotion Labs Manager for the Hardware Incubator. CoMotion Labs is a multi-industry incubator program hosting early-stage startups and innovation from both inside and outside the UW community. We provide critical infrastructures and opportunities for learning, mentoring, and networking. And we're always looking to connect with founders in climate tech, life science, hardware, and technology. For a limited time, tech entrepreneurs can take Startup Hall for a test drive and see if our resources, advisors, and community are a good fit. Use this QR code to apply now. Fundamentals for Startup is an open lecture series on topics related to entrepreneurship. Every week, we bring in experts to share insights, inspire action, and offer space for questions. All these talks are streamed and shared on our YouTube channel, and you can learn about upcoming events on our website. Just a reminder, please wait for the microphone before asking a question so our online audience can hear you. Today, I'm excited to introduce Andy Ouderkirk, Senior Director of Research at Meta, and Kelly Ingham, Vice President of AR Wearables and Research Partnership at Meta's Reality Lab. They'll talk about their framework for building high-growth companies. Welcome, Andy and Kelly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's such a joy being here. Kelly and I started working on this about 25 years ago, quite a while ago. And at the time, we were very interested in how do you create a large new business? The other thing we're both very conscientious people. We want to start something and have it be successful. How do you create robust businesses that have a high probability of success? Effectively pre-plan your pivots. If plan A doesn't work, do you have a plan B, plan C, plan D? And what we found is actually the two of those can be combined. And so you can mitigate risk and also grow huge opportunities. Of course, we've been working in this for quite a while. We've been teaching this at University of Minnesota. We now are integrating AI into the process, and we're really happy to be here to talk about this integration. So my background is really technical. I'm a PhD physical chemist. I'm an inventor. I have about 538 patents, issued US patents. And quite frankly, I do patents as a way of exploring new ideas. And so I think a patent's not really as so much for the patent itself, it really creates a white paper of where we can go, where we can move. Kelly, are you online?
I'm online. Can you hear me?
Perfect. You want to describe your background just a little bit?
Sure. I don't get the pleasure of seeing everybody's faces, but you get to see mine. So hopefully it's showing up well on the big screen there. So apologies I'm not there in person, but really excited to be here with Andy today to talk a little bit about how to build, robust businesses. My background is pretty unique. I'm not an inventor per se, not like Andy. I met Andy actually working at 3M. I think Andy was the fourth person I'd met at the company. And he said, Kelly, we need to invent some new businesses in LEDs. And my first question was, what is an LED? Right? That's a background I was coming from. And working with Andy, not only did I learn what an LED was, which is a light emitting diode, but was able to work with him to help create 3 new businesses. Those businesses were around films for LED backlights. So this was the emergence of large screen TVs. It was looking at components that could make LEDs brighter and more efficient. And then looking at projection systems with LEDs that ultimately became heads-up projection systems and really, I think, launched where I'm at today, which is really focusing on wearable devices and a really cool product, our Ray-Ban Metas. What I've learned through this whole process in working with Andy is that he has a roadmap in terms of how to think about the business and how to think about it from different perspectives. And I've worked with Andy, I think over 25 years now, and we've pulled this together into a process we call architecting. And that's what we want to share with you today. We only have 40 minutes today and Q&A, and so we're going to actually show kind of bits and pieces of how we've used this process, how this process was developed, and what we learned from it, and a chance that you could actually take the same process, the same approach, and help build businesses out of the great ideas that you have. Help identify, is it just a good idea or is it really a great idea? We're going to think about platforms and how to identify platforms, how to build roadmaps, and then how to use those roadmaps to really attract great partners, collaborators, and sponsors. So really excited to be here today and talk with Andy.
Thank you, Kelly. And please, as we go through this, if you have any questions, raise your hand. So when Kelly and I joined 3M, they train all the employees on culture of innovation. 3M is renowned for its innovation culture. One of the first things they show you are platforms. And what a platform is somebody came up with this cool invention, and it turns out that cool invention had many applications. And 3M would show dozens of these platforms and say, don't you want to be part of this? And so this is a great example. Nonwovens actually started as sasheen ribbons, decorative ribbons. And somebody said, wow, you could use this to make dust masks. You know, it's the same technology, just completely different market. And nonwovens has expanded enormously into all sorts of industries. Microreplication. Used to be overhead projectors used a large glass lens. The only people that could afford it were the military, so they had to use all sorts of crazy ways of displaying things. Roger Appledorn had the idea of making a microreplicated plastic lens to replace that big, heavy, expensive glass lens, and this created the overhead projector. Look at all the places microreplication of polymers went. And so, as a new employee, you look at these charts and come up with a bunch of questions. Now, wouldn't it be cool to start one of these platforms? Because not only would you come up with the first invention, but you come up with a series of related inventions. You could leverage the skills that you're developing, your capabilities you're developing, and the team you're with. So can you identify this platform early? Second question is, look at the timeline. This is something nobody ever pointed out. It's decades. And so you do the math and you realize, well, I better be really lucky, identify this platform early in my career because it's going to take 30 years for it to really turn into what it's capable of being. Is it possible to accelerate this timeline? And then the last question is, well, these were in the 60s, 70s, 80s. The world's changed a lot. Now what you notice is that a company will introduce a product and a fast follower will follow right along with a slight variation on that product and oftentimes displace the original innovator from the marketplace. Or fast follower will encompass the market and prevent the leader from moving into adjacent markets. And so how do you protect your company and your team from not only the idea you're working on now, but also where can these ideas go? Yeah, okay. So I had the joy of working with corporate research. Kelly had the joy of working with the corporate marketing group. And so between us, we worked with a lot of different groups, inside the company, outside the company, with partners, startups. And one of the things that we did, as we imagined, we were junior people, nobody's really listening to us that much, but we'd ask the question, if I was in a leadership position with this team, what would I do differently? What would I do the same? And then you'd observe what was happening. And this way, they call it like a trial run. It's like if you ever take tennis, the coach will teach you to swing 6 times in your head for every time you physically swing the tennis racket. You're training yourself. And by working with all these teams, you can see all sorts of situations and how they were resolved and how you would have done it differently and how that affected the outcome. And through this these experiences, we came up with a number of conclusions. One is, and this is the most frustrating one, is innovation is almost always taught that it's luck. I talked to a vice president involved in the Post-it note. I said, why do we teach it's luck? And he said it's inclusive. Everybody can try. The problem is, it's really skills. And by teaching as luck, you're not teaching it as skills. Now, the studies are, if you have an accomplishment, you're very successful, and you say it was luck, you're more likable than if you say, damn, I'm good, right? So people tend to lean towards its luck, but very clearly, innovation is about skill. And we did some research on this. Kelly will talk about this a bit. As an example, innovators that are most successful and consistently successful have both deep and broad skills. It's sometimes called the T-shaped person off the IDEO analysis. We analyzed 3M's patents, published a paper in Research Policy. This was summarized in David Epstein's book, Range. Kelly will talk about this a little bit. But just a teaser, if you look at the top 5 inventors in 3M, looking at their depth and breadth based on patents, 4 of the 5 started a billion-dollar business. You can say, is that causative or correlated? It's pretty clear it's causative. Next, interesting thing. So I have a lot of patents, and when I work with patent attorneys and managers, what was interesting is they always treat the patents like they're all the same. Inventions are all the same. So if you come up with an incremental invention, they put the same amount of effort into it as if you have a patent that could potentially change everything. Why is this? So most of our systems are set up for incremental innovations because they're the most common. And you have to be careful adopting systems for managing innovation because you'll go for the core, and then a breakthrough comes along and you're using systems that are not appropriate, are not effective for incremental innovation, for breakthrough innovations. And in fact, it'll take your breakthrough innovation and it'll turn it into an incremental innovation. So you need to be ambidextrous and look at your innovations and say, most of them will be incremental, and that's okay. A few are going to be breakthroughs. How do you treat those differently? And this is what Kelly and I will be diving into. Third one, which is kind of funny, and I don't know how you all are going to react to this. Incremental innovations are loved at first sight. Breakthroughs are almost always hated. Arthur Schopenhauer, who's sometimes called the cynical philosopher, summarized this in the 3 stages of truth. And this is, take your breakthroughs, hey, I got this idea. First, they'll reject it. You continue pursuing it. Then they get angry at you for continuing to pursue this stupid idea. And then you're successful, and then they say, it was obvious all along. Ever happened to anybody here? We actually flipped this around and said, this is a qualifier. If it's a breakthrough, you're going to get pushback. And we actually said, let's run an experiment on this. So let's first look at the different types of innovation. You're probably familiar with the red ocean, blue ocean strategy, Gary Hamel's work on evolution of marketplaces. These are usually presented as you have things that have been done and you have things that have not been done. And it's a simple transition from new markets or new technologies to things that have not been accomplished yet. And so the argument is you don't want to be in the crowded space, you want to be in the space that's open. So you look at that model, and going back to file a lot of patents, not all patents are the same, it doesn't fit this model. Some patents are incremental, they're kind of moving the shoreline. Yeah, okay, that's great. Some patents create a whole new range of opportunities. So it doesn't look like this. What does it really look like? And so Kelly and I have come up with this model and said it's really more organic. And you have certain opportunities. One is the coastline is bumpy. And you have certain areas that are hyped. Everybody's talking about it. AI? Okay. That's probably a hyped area. There are a lot of people thinking in very similar lines of this area. There are areas adjacent to it that for whatever reason people are not pursuing at all. Very interesting. Then you also have things that people just missed. And we call those closed platforms. So this could have been done decades ago, but for whatever reason, people didn't do it. Now, there's several opportunities perhaps in that closed opportunity, and so you can fill it up, but it's usually more than one or two. A classic example is Post-it notes. Post-it notes today is pretty much the same as it was 30 years ago. Okay, it's a closed platform, but it's a great platform, right? Wouldn't you like to have owned that? The fourth type of opportunity is one that's off the shoreline. And this is something that can expand 360 degrees. Okay, so this is a new technology that hasn't been really considered before. And you can go backwards just as much as you can go forwards. So as an entrepreneur, you look at these and say, I want to think about these opportunities in different ways. Most of my innovations are going to be incremental. Some of them are going to be in hyped areas, some are going to be in hidden areas. I'm probably going to like the hidden ones better. Okay, why are they hidden? It's a good question. People are herd mentality. They like being in a place everybody else is. It's uncomfortable being by yourself. And so there's a certain social reason for this, very likely. But really, going to the problem with incremental innovations is they usually are one-offs. You do one thing, works or it doesn't work, but you can't carry it beyond that. You can't reuse a lot of the techniques and the improvements that you've generated, the capabilities and the team you've generated. Those are really part of platforms. And so the second grouping of innovations are either closed platforms or open platforms. Honestly, I like closed platforms a lot because the technology exists, the markets exist. It's something that you can pull together reasonably quickly. Art Fry, talked to him just a few months ago. He built a pilot line in the basement of his house. He built it too big. They had to tear down the wall when 3M said, okay, let's put it in the plant. So that's how crazy it is. But it's something he could build in his house to make the Post-it notes. Open platforms are a breakthrough technology. You're creating new markets, oftentimes with new technologies. There's a lot of infrastructure you need to build, a lot of customer base that needs to be built, but you have the potential of opening up something that's entirely new. So a lot of this depends on what your goal is. So as I mentioned, one of the great things about 3M is they have something called 15% time, which is permission. Yeah, go ahead.
Does an idea move on the frontier as time passes on?
I'm sorry?
Does an idea, for example, so for example, let's take blockchain. Does the idea move on the frontier as the time passes on? So for example, blockchain was pretty much hyped a couple of years back, but now it's pretty much hidden.
Yeah, it's well entrenched. So there would be one of those peninsulas that most people know what blockchain is, and they've thought about various applications of blockchain. And Kelly will be talking about this more in her chapter. That's fine. There's something we call onlys. What is it you know that others don't? And we'll talk about that. So even though it may be a hyped area, it still could be areas that you have unique perspectives and unique opportunities and potential of generating a platform. So I wouldn't discard something just because it's in a hyped area. So we have 15% time. You can work on anything you want. And we said, okay, we're going to look for a new platform. And I'm just going to take hundreds of ideas, filter those down, look for ones that have the kind of earmarks of a platform. Sorry. And 3 ideas came out of that that looked like they could be really transformative. And one was 3D integrated circuits, and this was going to basically replicating the brain in semiconductors. Second was fly-by-wire manufacturing. This is a variation of something called digital twins. But instead of, what we're showing here is fly-by-wire means the computer is controlling the airplane. That airplane shown in the picture is unstable. A human pilot cannot fly it. So what the pilot does is they move a joystick that tells the computer what the pilot wants the plane to do, and the computer figures out how to move surfaces to make this fly correctly. The advantage is the plane is a lot more efficient. So the question was, could we apply this to manufacturing? Could we design manufacturing lines that humans couldn't operate, but the machines could? And the humans would tell the machines what they want the system to do. Third one was, I'm a laser chemist, so I said, yeah, optical films. Optical films right now are made by thin film deposition, super expensive, all done in vacuum. It's not uncommon for things to cost hundreds of dollars a square foot in production. And we said, well, could we make these using co-extrusion of 2 different polymers? And at the time, there was actually a book published that said you cannot co-extrude layers of polymers precisely. So you're taking molten polymer layer A, molten polymer layer B, putting them into a feed block, compressing those layers down. And you have to take layers of polymers that start out a few millimeters thick, and you're going to end up with them being about 80 nanometers thick. And you want to do that with a precision of a few nanometers. So as I mentioned, the book said can't do it precisely. So at the time, people would only make decorative films with this. If you ever see kind of tinsel wrap with kind of iridescent colors, that's probably how those were made. And we looked at it and said, well, why is that? Why is it not precise? When you think about the physics of compressing polymer layers, why can't you compress them 1,000 times, 100,000 times, and do it with a very high precision? There's nothing in physics that says you can't do that. It's an engineering problem. Not a hard engineering problem, but it's an engineering problem. And so we had the hypothesis that you could make very high precision co-extruded polymer layers. And so we looked at each one of these and said, what is it we know about these that others don't? And the first 2, we knew some things, but not a lot. The third one, we said, well, we believe that this can be done precisely. Nobody else does, or very few other people do. Plus, we have an application for it that goes against physics, something called the brightness theorem for increasing the brightness of displays, as Kelly described. So we took those 3 ideas to experts, and we liked all 3 of the ideas, quite frankly. We picked the one the experts liked the least. Why would we do that? Think of it like the stock market. If you are going and looking at buying a stock, would you go to the stock that everybody tells you to buy? Right? What would likely be the consequences of that? No, you'd probably look for a stock and say, I know something about this industry or this company, the people that run it. Others don't generally know. Or I see how this industry is going to evolve. I think I should invest in this company. Be a much more likely company to do well. And the same thing's going back to Arthur Schopenhauer's observation. It's true. So honestly, I don't know what your reaction is to that. If that makes you comfortable or if you've seen the same experience. It's interesting. I've reproduced this experiment many times in different environments. It's actually one of the most consistent indicators. Yeah.
I think I get uncomfortable with that idea because, obviously you consulted experts that you trust that their worst idea is still, or their least liked idea is still viable. But how do you make sure that when you're...
Absolutely. How do you tell the difference between a false positive and a false negative, right? And the first thing is listen to the experts really well. So multilayer optical film, there are three reasons they didn't like the idea. One is you can't manufacture it. He was saying you can't co-extrude precision layers. And we talked about that earlier, and I said, well, that's not a physics. That first principle analysis says you should be able to do this. Second was there's no application for it. And we had a great application for it in mind. And third was Dow tried it and failed. Dow put 10 years and tens of millions of dollars into making these products, and it didn't go well. You need to be able to answer those three questions, or whatever the reason they're pushing back on, and say, why do we think differently? Do you have an application? Do you have a marketplace? And turns out people needed this. What we did is was a film, you put it into your computer display, it makes it 50% brighter with no cost, right? That's a pretty good market. Again, no additional power consumption, reduces the power effectively. Inexpensive to produce because we can do this co-extrusion with high precision. It's an inexpensive process. We think this would be a great market, and that market turned out to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year, right? So you need to be really good at listening to the experts and understanding. This is why you dive into analytic thinking, first principle thinking. Why would you disagree? So if I'd encourage you all to read up on first principle thinking and really develop that as a skill, because this is something that turns out to be surprisingly useful. And you listen to people and you understand what their pushback is. Oftentimes people are pushing back due to heuristics, not laws, not fundamental physics. And understanding those gaps tells you why is it that you think you have a probability of succeeding in this where others have failed. Then following up on your question, you got to convince people. The first one to prove it to is yourself. Why do you think you're right? What can I do? What experiments could I do? You know, simulations can I do that would convince myself that my thinking is correct? This is indeed was a false negative. Okay, how do you dive into this? How do you do a prototype? But at the same time, think big, because going back to Arthur Schopenhauer, when you prove it, then everybody will get it, and it's too late to really map out where this can go. So you have a conundrum that one is you want to convince people, but as soon as you convince people, you start the clock spinning in terms of being able to explore new applications of this. So this is what we did. Actually, this is with Kelly's boss at the time. She and I sat down, we spent 2 weeks saying, okay, we got this idea of making multi-layer co-extrusion film, do it really precisely. We can use this for enhancing the brightness of computer displays. But let's think of what other applications we could have for this. And we thought of lots of displays. We thought of polarized lighting. We said, oh, we could make reflective polarized, or we could make mirrors. And so we thought of decorative films. This ended up in My Size Barbie. As the first application. We had planned that. Not specifically Barbie, but we thought of toys and decorative applications. And you know, this was a $2 million a year business, which is tiny in the whole scheme of things, but it really established the validity of the process. And it was easy to make, quite frankly. So this is a great way of kind of developing it. But as we were developing that product, we were thinking through the next stage products. And those went into light pipes, went to American Express clear credit cards for blocking infrared light, it's in cars for the windshields, it's in housing for blocking infrared light, and it's in displays. And so we fleshed out in a 2-week period about a dozen different products. And we had about 50% of them turn into tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And by mapping these out, we did a much better job filing the patents because the patents could be organized, they could not create problems for each other, and we could reduce the cost for developing it because we're on a very lean budget. This is 15% time still. So imagine the comfort this gives us, and now investing in the technology, investing in the team, not being afraid of letting the team down because, quite frankly, at that time there was a competition between liquid crystals and plasma displays. I didn't know which one was going to win. And so we developed the mirror platform as a contingency plan. In case polarizers didn't work, we could take 90% of the technology in the team and reapply it to mirror technologies. So we're pre-planning our pivots. Unfortunately, it turns out both platforms were very profitable. That'll switch to Kelly.
Great. Thanks, Andy. So Andy provided a lot of background in terms of how he was able to do this, and I joined him as well for multi-layer optical film. And what we've done is we've taken our learnings in terms of this process and really built it out into some key areas that I wanted to share with you today. This is more of an excerpt. We have a much kind of bigger, more robust process and worksheets that we're working on right now. But these are kind of the main points that I wanted to highlight that you kind of built from Andy's story that he provided. So first is, how do you know if you have a good idea or a great idea? Creating your only statement, architecting, we call this your planning for hypergrowth, creating roadmaps. This is all about risk mitigation and planning your pivots, forming high performance teams. And then how can you do this even faster? How do you accelerate yourself, and especially in the age of AI? And so we'll close with that today, and Andy will talk about some of his learnings and some of his thinking in terms of how he leverages AI to make him even a better innovator and a better inventor. So if we go to the next slide, the first question is, how do you know if you have a good idea or a great idea? So a good idea solves a problem and develops value for the consumer, right? A stapler is a good idea, right? At that point in time, you needed to staple pieces of paper together, and the stapler can do that. The reason that a stapler may not be a great idea is that how do you extend the platform of stapling? Can you take it to other markets? Can you take that core process and take it to other markets, and those markets would be interested in it and would it solve a problem for them? Can you extend the technology, right? Can you build a platform around the technology, or is it really just one core technology? Can you take the way that you make staplers and extend it across different ways on how you can make it, or different process steps? And Andy and I had this challenge, and we actually found a stapling platform, and it was basically an air-based stapler that was kind of the precursor to staple guns. And so staple guns, yeah, if you have an air compressor with a stapler and you can actually use it to, do high pressure stapling, whether that's, pieces of paper or that's nails and houses, that could be an extensible platform. And so what we encourage you to do is to think about, when you have a good idea, can you extend it? Can you think about it from different perspectives, and can it solve more problems than just the problem that you're solving? And by the way, good ideas aren't bad, right? Good ideas can still be great businesses, but they tend to be more incremental, which means that they're going to be harder to protect and harder to build moats and more easily replicated. And really what we want to do is, if you're going to build a $100 million business, right, is you want something that we call a deep moat, right? And a deep moat is something that's predictable, right? That you can actually have multiple products, multiple technologies, possibly you have key inventions on how to make it, and that you solve multiple consumer problems. And that's how you build up large-sized businesses. Now remember, if you have a $10 million business, it's probably fine. Most people aren't going to look and try to take over your business. If you have a $50 to $100 million business, you will definitely have competitors. If you have a $1 billion business, everyone is going to try to knock you off the top. So that's why, as you create bigger businesses, it's so important to think about how you can leverage platforms for those businesses. And Andy talked about closed platforms and open platforms. In terms of our process, we have this guide at the bottom. When we think about ideas, we call it scouting. You're going to come across a lot of really good ideas all the time, especially here at the university, right? It's ripe with great ideas, right? It's ripe with the fact that you can actually network with other individuals and find great ideas. And so as we think about it, we're going to use a process called pre-architecting to kind of navigate, is your good idea a great idea? And then how can you architect it into other types of either solving other problems, and other markets? How can you manufacture it? And then what other technology platforms can you bring to play? And then architecting is really a process where we do that at a much higher level, much more detailed, and we bring in more stakeholders and collaborators and help use that to build our team. And the output of that is actually building a product roadmap. And we build product roadmaps very early in the process. The reason being that if you need to go to stakeholders to get funding and you tell them you have a bunch of ideas, they typically want to know what is the product that's going to come from it, and is it something that you could build a business around? And so we really look to build those product roadmaps very early on. And we find that by using this process, the product roadmaps are about 80% right? Because you're using hypothetical thinking to help drive those product roadmaps. So if you go to the next slide, one of the core tenets that Andy talked about was an only statement. We very much believe that to drive powerful, protectable innovation, that you should have a core, unique capability that you bring to that innovation. And that could be everything from unique insights into a specific technology, a specific process, a specific market. It'd be unique capabilities that you have that you can bring to bear. Maybe you're working here at the university and that you understand how to develop a core technology that's very unique, leveraging the university and your position, right? Maybe it's a combination of insights and capabilities that you can bring together. And it could even be your network. It could be the people that you know, the suppliers and partners. And we typically write down our only statements in terms of something like this. I'm the only person that has this X insight in the world. I'm the only person that can actually do multi-layer replicated film, or the only company that can. And so when we think about multi-layer optical film, 3M was the only company that actually had a couple of things going for it. One is they knew there was an application. With the advent of LCD screens taking off everything from mobile phones, looking at this for monitors and TVs, that there was a need for brightness enhancement because it would actually reduce the power and enable more efficient displays. 3M also knew how to do extruded films, right? And Andy's hypothesis is they could do this extrusion in high precision. So you see the difference where they take the only statements and they look at where they could actually expand those only statements. And so we think about what do you know that others don't, right? And you can look at that from many broad perspectives. And your only statement should become the core as you think about your innovation. Because as you innovate with that core unique capability, that enables you to create those deeper moats around the technology, the markets, and the processes that you're developing. If you go to the next slide. So Andy talked about first principles thinking. And I had to grab two quotes, right? One was from Steve Jobs. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple. But it's worth it in the end because once you get there, you can move mountains. Elon took a similar approach. I think that's important to reason from first principles rather than analogy. The normal way we conduct our lives is we reason by analogy. We do this because it is like something else we have done, or it's like what other people are doing. With first principles, you boil things down to the most fundamental truths and then reason from there. So Elon is credited with really, kicking off the EV car, revolution, right? And he did this by looking at batteries. And the story is very famous because he looked at batteries and he said, wait a minute, the materials cost of these batteries is low. Why are they so expensive, right? Why are they so inefficient? And he used first principles thinking to break down the problem, to break down each of the different components and say, how could I actually do this differently, given what I know, given that the batteries should not be this expensive? What are the core steps? What are the core processes? What are the core areas that are making these batteries overly expensive? And how can I break those down and then build them up again? And so that was really interesting because he took that same perspective. Steve Jobs takes the same perspective. And so it's really thinking about the problem and then looking at it from different perspectives. And so we talk about using your analytical mind, right, to break it down, as well as critical thinking. And in our worksheets, we actually have a process of kind of breaking down this problem by looking at it from a technology perspective. We look at it from a manufacturing and process perspective, and then we look at it from an application or customer perspective. And what we find is that by leveraging first principles thinking, which you can actually leverage in a lot of areas of your life, and then building that problem back up, you'll find that you come with not only a better solution, but to Steve Jobs' credit, you come with something that's more simple than maybe the complex answer that you had before. And so Andy and I have done a lot of work thinking about first principles thinking. And what we find is it's interesting that it's not something that's really taught. It's something that both Andy and I have learned in terms of looking at very complex systems and breaking them down, and then bringing different perspectives at play to really leverage those insights to come to better solutions. And so it's something that we think is really powerful and is kind of key in terms of how we think about the architecting method. So if you go to 16, this is an eye chart. I can't see you guys, but girls, but I'm sure you can barely see this. This is an example of one of the worksheets. And what we do, and this is what we call pre-architecting, so this is something that you can do on your own, you could do it as a small team, it's supposed to be done fairly quickly, is that in the technologies, you say, okay, what are the key differentiated components that I have? How are they different? Why are they important? And you actually list those, you list how they're different, and then you score them. Now, the reason that we do the scoring is because what we're really looking for are areas that are highly differentiated. Now, Andy and I, 25 years, 30 years, we go way back, right? So we grew up in the Six Sigma age. I don't know if they even teach Six Sigma anymore, but one of the takeaways that we had that we really liked was kind of their logarithmic scoring, right? So that means it's 0, 1, 3, 9. And what this means is if you have something that's really differentiated, it gets a 9, right? Like you want that to pop out, right? 3 means it is differentiated, but maybe not as much as the others. 1 is it's really not differentiated. And 0 means there's no differentiation. You should just move on, right? It's already been done. It's already out there. We take the same approach to how do you manufacture? How do you make this? What are the key transformation processes? How are they different and how important? And then we score those. And then on the customer side, which is the area that I really enjoy, my background is in marketing and strategy, is what are the key industries, markets, and segments? What are the market exciters? And so this is really about like, what is a customer problem you're solving? And how excited are they going to be that you solved it? Like Andy and I would always talk about that if you come in with a 9, like you're solving a problem that's actually a 9 score, the customer is so excited they won't let you leave. They're like, I need you to solve this problem for me right now. I need you to tell me how you're going to solve it. It's such a big problem, right? If you read other books that talk about vitamins or painkillers, right? That's a painkiller. I have a pain and I want it to go away. If you hear that from your customer or your market, that's a 9. Now, a 3, the customer's gonna be like, that's interesting. I'd like to hear more, right? Come back again, right? So 3s are also very positive. 1s, we typically say, you've wasted the customer's time, right? And they're like, beat it, right? Get out of here. You wasted my time. And a 0 means what we call fitness as standard. Like it's already a standard in the market. It's already an expectation that you can deliver a certain capability or that you solve a certain level of problem. And so when we do our thinking around good and great ideas, a great idea, you should have 3s or 9s across a couple of these columns. Now, not all of them. We find that some of the columns are maybe much more skewed on customer side. There's more applications for this. And maybe the technology, there is not as many 9s. And maybe from a manufacturing perspective, you don't know how the heck to make this, or it's a very standard manufacturing process. That's not where the differentiation lies. And that's okay. But what we're looking at is that you have 9s, at least 2 of the 3 columns, and ideally 3. You also find out by doing this process, where do you have gaps? Maybe the manufacturing side, you don't know how to make it. And so the gap is that you need to actually go find some partners that could actually bring some differentiation at play here to actually enable your overall potential platform. So we run these worksheets. We kind of say these are a 30-minute worksheet. The idea is that you run them quickly, right? That you actually can take different perspectives. You can bring in different team members and actually go very quickly to understand, do I have something that could be a platform? and use it to really organize your thinking. What we're really doing here is providing you a guide to help break the problem down so that you can build it back up again. So Andy, I think if you go to slide 18, because we talked about 17 as being the process, maybe go one more. So a couple things we're not going to go deep on today, just in the spirit of time, and I know we need to leave time for questions. Architecting is very similar to the pre-architecting process, but in architecting, this is a chance for you to bring more people into the process and go deeper. So if you only did 30 minutes in your pre-architecting, architecting might take a day and a half. Andy and I have led probably 50 to 60 architecting sessions across multitude of industries. Some really fun ones. Architecting in India, where we looked at new materials for motorbikes, so two-wheelers in India. Andy and I can tell you a lot about two-wheelers in India after doing that session. I've done sessions in Korea on shipbuilding. I've done everything from data centers to new materials and inks. We've done things in cosmetics. We've done even things in AR, VR. And so architecting is a chance to bring in what we call SMEs, subject matter experts, in each of the different areas. And so here, if you feel like, hey, there's 4 or 5 markets that are pretty interesting, you can reach out and say, do I know people in those markets? Can I get their information and have them help me really understand, is this customer problem a 3 or 9? Is it really that big of a problem and a pain point for them? Right? Can I grab people in the manufacturing or on the technology side to help me kind of work through these worksheets? And what we do is we actually have a day and a half process that we take people through as facilitators. We help them become facilitators and bring other facilitators on board. And what we find by going through this kind of shared experience of architecting and then developing technology and platform roadmaps, that they actually start buying into the idea, right? Andy used to tell a great story about a scientist that he used to work with that would have a great idea. And so he'd write them on Post-it notes and put it by the door of the conference room and just hope that somebody would walk by and read it and be excited by it. And don't know if that one works or not. I don't think it worked well for him. But this shared experience, we find that you get that buy-in and people get excited. They want to be part of your team. They want you to help build this idea with you, right? And what we find is you need those collaborators
Right.
in order to go forward.
Yeah, just going back to an earlier question, this is a great time to bring those experts that we're pushing back in because you want them to be part of it. And the outcome you really want is they feel like they really contributed to the idea. So this is an opportunity of really getting everybody on the same page and making it us. Right? You want to avoid the independent inventor really letting, to Kelly's story about the Post-it note. You really want somebody to make this inclusive and get this as broad a buy-in and participation as possible.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly. Okay, so next slide, developing platforms and roadmaps. When we talk about a platform is all the possibilities. So as you start taking your technology or your process and linking it to a customer pain point, right, that's really centered around your only statement, your core capabilities, your unique insights, a platform is all the different possibilities you could make, right? We have some worksheets as kind of a free flow, right? You can link them together. They can be based on different areas. If you looked at multi-layer optical film, there might be multiple different pathways of multiple layer optical film. A roadmap, so a platform doesn't have constraints. A roadmap, you start building constraints and really starting focusing on a product. And the constraint that we like to build in first is time. What could you do near term, midterm, long term? Near term is usually 1 to 2 years. Midterm 3 to 5, long term 5 years. And that's usually in a basis of thinking through, resources, capabilities, processes to be developed, technology development, market development. Where can you go? And then how do you kind of list those together in terms of a roadmap? And what you'll see here in the roadmap that Andy shared, that he started here on monitors, right? And actually monitors were kind of low-hanging fruit at that time. I don't know if any of you that had the big CRT monitors on your desk. I'm aging myself. I can't even see the room, but I'm dating myself because I used to have a CRT monitor, right? Remember, I think it was an HP 486, right? Big fat monitors. And at that time, they were like, wow, we want to come out with thinner monitors. Like these would only be 2 inches thick. right? And in order to do that, they actually had to have a different film structure and light structure. And so that was really kind of the first advance for multi-layer optical film. And so going into that market was kind of the first market because there was such a need to have monitors fit on your desks, and that they were able to expand into smaller displays that had higher resolution requirements like mobile phones. If you remember the old candy bar phones from Nokia, going into watch displays, Pico projectors, and now that same film technology platform is in our VR/AR headsets. So that just shows kind of the roadmap of products that could be developed. I think by developing this roadmap, it also helps focus on what is your vision, right? In multi-layer optical film, it was about making high precision constructed layers. And we used to have a saying where we talk about making it by the mile and selling it by the inch. That's not a bad business model. And so by developing these roadmaps, it helps you kind of expand your vision and bring your collaborators in also in developing those roadmaps. The other piece of a great roadmap is that you have something that you can now take to sponsors, to stakeholders, to VCs, because you also will have fundamental problems that you need to solve to enable this technology to be true or to get into this market, which usually requires funding. And you need a way to be able to communicate to those parties what you can do in what time sequence. Andy talked about the Barbie doll business. I don't think any investors would get excited, other than maybe Mattel, about investing in glitter film for Barbie doll dresses. But what's exciting is Andy had a path of like, we're going to do this first. This will actually help us leverage like all the film that's coming off that's not precision yet, and help us mature the process, and we get to sell the outputs before we get to go to monitors and cell phones and these other devices. And so it created a roadmap of products. By having multiple roadmaps, it also enables pivots. The best thing I can tell you in advance is if you go to a VC and get funding and that first, market technology product doesn't work, it's much better to say, I planned that. See my pivot on my roadmap? That was just an experiment to go to the next one and to mature the technology, versus I got to go back to the drawing board and think about what's next. And so that's another reason that these product roadmaps become quite powerful. The last is around invention. Andy will tell you, as someone who holds over 600 patents, that he wants to invent all of these products and protect them, right? Because that helps create that moat around that $100 million business. I know we're getting short on time, so I'll just talk quickly. If you go to the next slide, high performance teams, man, they make or break you. You want people around you that can think both broad, right? So they have experience in multiple different areas, as well as deep. And we talk about those people as T-shaped people, right? So those are people that are really going to be able to accelerate and advance your team, right? Your idea and your systems, because they can be much more nimble than maybe people that only are deep, in one discipline or are broad, but they don't have any depth. And so really focusing on being T-shaped, as well as bringing T-shaped people to your team. If you go to the next slide, one of the other big ahas that we had is that a lot of processes like stage gates, new NPIs, they really are like, okay, the technical team develops something and then they hand it off to the business development team. The business development team go find a market for it. And if you find a market for it, then we're going to make it. And then you hand it to the manufacturing team. And it's step by step by step. I can tell you right now that this works pretty well for incremental ideas, right? That you can actually just go step by step. But for breakthroughs, it's a disaster. It takes way too long. The learning cycle that comes back through these different teams ends up breaking, and you end up missing the opportunity, right? And a lot of times these things, they get killed early on because you couldn't find the opportunity. And so Andy and I have been a big proponent of building a team in advance that has technology, manufacturing, and business development marketing partnerships in the team. So that team actually works together and iterates together on that breakthrough. They all learn together. So if we talked about those 3 perspectives in the worksheets, we think about that in the teams as well. So it's not just a handoff and you hope the next team drives it forward and can make it a great idea. We also talked about a little bit about using the architecting to attract your SMEs, subject matter experts, and sponsors. Next slide, I'll go very quickly. When we work with partners in what we call highly collaborative partnerships. Transactional project management is, I have this job, I need you to do it. Here's a PO, go do it, throw the results over the fence, right? What we find for breakthroughs is that you really need to go much deeper with your partners, because your partners may be part of your only statement. They may be actually developing those capabilities for you. And you should think about your partners as part of your high performance teams. And so we tend to move beyond just kind of transactional with partners and really look at how we can build collaborative partnerships. What can I give you that you can give me, right? How do we develop together? Maybe we form a joint IP relationship. Maybe we form a manufacturing entity together, right? How do we solve these problems together? How do we co-embed our teams? And so we provide those mindsets because we find that a lot of times you'll have a transactional mindset with partners and suppliers, and it just isn't going to get you where you need to go. Because if Andy showed you those platform maps in the beginning, those took 30 years. Like, we just don't have that kind of time anymore, right? We want to be able to develop faster and smarter and be able to use these process steps to really enable big breakthrough innovations. Andy, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, last thing, I'd like to circle back to invention. There's beliefs that inventions are just recombining existing technologies, and that's certainly true, but it turns out it's more complex than that. And the other is that all problems are the same. If you've ever been through Six Sigma, a lot of these processes, they teach you basically this process works for all problems. And patently, that's not true. You really want to pick the right tools for the different problems that you're facing. And so if we think about invention, one axis is combining technologies. Absolutely true. This is where breadth really becomes useful. But combining technologies is not always trivial. If it's within a field, it is trivial. If it's between fields, it gets a little more difficult. If it's between fields that never talk to each other, which exists surprisingly common, this is the extra area, it's rare. And there's certainly information that's just not accessible. Okay, so understanding where your information lies on this is really important. The second is a modification of the Ingham model. So the Ingham model is simple or clear, complicated, complex, or chaos. And what this means is the type of problem you're trying to solve is very different depending on if it's incremental or a breakthrough. If you're doing a new paradigm, it is chaos. It's just part of it. And that's not bad. There are tools that you can use to manage that. And this is really what the architecting is helping do, is manage complex or even chaotic situations. Because this is necessary with either a closed platform or an open platform. So then the question is, how is this going to change with AI? And I've been working a lot with this and as it's developing, and I'm sure a lot of the people in the group here have done the same. What AI is phenomenal at is working through the bottom left portion into the upper right, but not all the way. And it's really interesting to pose to ChatGPT or Llama, here's an idea, and have it reject your idea. Okay, go back to Arthur Schopenhauer. This is actually interesting. Okay, why is it rejecting this idea? And so I actually use it as a test. Is this something everybody knows? Or is this something that's challenging assumptions? Is this a new paradigm? So inherently, current AI systems are not trained on new paradigms, nor do they have access to inaccessible information. So this is where your only statement becomes really important, and your ability to deal with the pushback that you're going to get with a breakthrough. It's really important. This will never be turned over to AI with the current systems. However, once you have that idea, AI is a phenomenal collaborator. So going to the architecting sheets, it's fun to go through and look at these different perspectives. Flesh it out and use it as kind of a fact check, as an example. These are two axes of invention. There are actually quite a few axes on this, but these are two of the most important. So what's next? These are some ideas we have. One is that AI is really going to commoditize incremental innovation. It's going to move much faster. Information is going to become much more accessible. It's really remarkable. This means that if you really want to differentiate yourself and create a timeline, we need to really focus on breakthroughs more. AI is your best collaborator. It's amazing how this can increase your breadth. It's a teacher. And so depth, there's limits to AI. Sometimes you're better off going to literature, but breadth, it's outstanding. Learn new areas, learn new ways of thinking and looking at problems. It's great at bringing information, but you still need to bring in your analytic skills. Analytic skills, breaking the problem down, first principle thinking, is this right? Is there a different way? Going back to Elon Musk's story, $80 worth of materials into a $600 kilowatt hour battery. Why is that? Let's think about that at first principle level, and say, what would be the basis for that? Is that something we could change? This is a hypothesis, the fourth one that I have. I think patents are going to become even more valuable. We're entering an exponential age. 20 years is a long time, 20, 21 years, depending on the type of patent, how you file it. And lastly, circling back to the problem statement, I hope the one thing you come out of today with is not all problems are the same. And depending on the type of problem you're trying to solve, you'll create different types of opportunities, and you really want to use different types of tools for solving those problems. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you all for joining us today, and a big thank you to Andy and Kelly. Our next series begins again on Friday, March 28th at noon. Please also join us on Thursday evening, March 20th, for the next installment of our Start Something Conversation series, featuring Kraken owner and tech entrepreneur Samantha Holloway. Labs member can use the code STARTUP to register for free. Thanks for a great winter quarter.